Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor. I'm a Sony Global Imaging Ambassador. Now, I've been an ambassador for 6 years, but my journey with Sony didn't start there. It started with the Alpha 100 that you can see on the shelf there. And what I'd like to do is talk to you about the lenses, my favorite Sony lenses. And these are E-mount lenses. It's the top 10 E-mount lenses. Now, this is a subjective approach, of course. I'm not talking about bench testing sharpness scores here. I'm just talking about the 10 lenses that I love to travel with. I'm a sort of photographer that shoots everything from action sports, wildlife, to right through to landscape and portraits, and so I need to choose lenses that are more than up to the job of covering a wide range of subject matter. So you might find that you've got a love of a particular specialist lens which is not on the table. And that's fine. It doesn't mean to say it's not valid and worthy. It's just that this is my choice of the top 10. Okay, so let's take a look at what I've decided to put in the top 10. Now, we're 5 years into the full-frame mirrorless cameras, and so I've watched the lens build up from just the 3 original lenses, 2 of which are actually on the table here, I've swapped out lenses from time to time, but these are the 10 at the end of 2018 that I'm loving to work with now. Okay, so the first off is sitting on my A9 camera is the 100 to 400 GM lens. Now, I was actually waiting for this lens for quite a while. Because I need that 400mm focal length. I was using an old A-mount lens on my A7R II before this lens was released, and it was announced with the A9. They are sort of a companion set, if you like, I then could sell my 70 to 400 A-mount lens. As well as having the 100-400, I love the 400 reach, but as they say, how much is enough? Just a little bit more. So one of the other lenses I put on the table, and I have actually classified it as a lens, is the 1.4 Teleconverter. Now, this will push the reach of the 400mm focal length out to 560mm, so that does give me a little bit of extra reach. Now, I do lose 1 f-stop worth of light in that process. So when I'm shooting with the 100-400 wide open, I'm actually shooting now at the equivalent of f8. Now, the f8 is an important figure, really. It's the f8 is the smallest aperture. You can shoot fast action and track and constantly change the focus for every subsequent shot on a camera such as the A7R III. Now, and that's why what I always advise some people, think carefully about whether you're going for the 1.4 or the 2 times teleconverter. Because if you're an A7R III user, you probably want to fall in line with the 1.4. You're also going to be rewarded with slightly sharper, well, I do like the sharpness of the 1.4 a lot when matched with the 100-400 GM lens. You do find a little bit of softening of sharpness on the 2 times teleconverter, which is typical of those 2 times teleconverter, and it's something that I'm not prepared to lose. I'd prefer to crop in a little bit tighter in post than to get the extra reach. Now, the 2 times teleconverter may be a more sensible choice for the 7200 GM or the 400mm prime, which is, you'll notice, not on the table. I'd like, and it might actually be in my top 10 if Sony were bold enough to give me one, but I'm saving up for that lens as we speak. Okay, so there's your 2 lenses, the 100-400 and the 1.4 teleconverter. This 100-400 and the converter will sometimes find their way onto my A7R III on the right there, because of the reason for that is the resolution just gives me a little bit more croppability in post. So much so that I could actually shoot in APS-C mode on the A7R III, still have 18 megapixels. Remember, 4K is just 8.3 megapixels, so I can still crop even if I've cropped in camera, and that gives me an effective focal length of 840 millimeters if I have the teleconverter and the APS-C mode switched on. So this is certainly a combo that I love shooting with on the A9 and also the A7R III. Something else I should add is that as well as the A9 being able to track focus at f11, the new A7 III is also well endowed in that area. You can use a 2x teleconverter on the 100-400 on the A7 III and still track AF if that's if you definitely needed the extra reach there. Okay, so we have another white telephoto zoom. Now some people would prefer to see the 7200 GM lens. Now because I need the extra reach, I've chosen the 100-400, and the other 7200 I've actually put in my top 10 is actually the f4. And the reason for that is it's half the weight of the GM or the 100-400. So if I know I'm going out on a shoot and I'm pretty certain that I'm not going to be looking for excessive reach or 400mm reach, the 7200 will certainly find its way into my bag. I've shot portraits with the 7200, landscapes with the 7200. Some people say, what's the best landscape lens? Well, it's the lens that suits the focal length that you're trying to shoot. So, and this is spectacularly sharp. You do lose one f-stop, but for the weight saving, this certainly finds its way in my kit bag. It found its way into my kit bag when I went overseas in January this year. So it certainly still is a great lens that has earned its place in the top 10 for me. Okay, let's just move these to one side while we cover the primes in the center. Now these two primes in the front here, they're two of the original three lenses that were launched with the original A7R and A7 cameras 5 years ago. We had the 35mm f2.8 Carl Zeiss, and we also have the 55mm Zeiss 1.8. And they certainly got the lenses right on the original release. The third lens, just in case you were wondering, was the 2870 kit lens. I've used it, but I've forgotten about it. But these are still in my bag. This one of the reasons that I very rarely leave home without this lens is it's just over 4 ounces, 120 grams. It's spectacularly sharp. Admittedly it's a 2.8, it's not an ultra wide aperture, and I have used the 35mm 1.4, but I found even though I own the 35mm 1.4, most of the time I was using the 2.8. It's so small that when put onto the full frame cameras, it's a great street photography lens. It doesn't shout, here's a photographer with a big lens coming. I put the camera into silent shooting mode, use this 35mm, great. Typically I'm stopped down to f8, f11, f16, so I really don't need that ultra wide aperture on that 35mm. The 55mm, when this one was priced and people could see, it was a little bit more expensive than say a Canon 50mm or a Nikon 50mm 1.8. That's until people realized how spectacularly sharp this lens is. As soon as it was bench tested by DxOMark, people realized that the higher premium price was certainly justified, because this is a very special lens. If you've looked on the forums, anybody who owns this lens, and occasionally people say, oh, what do you think of this lens? You never see a bad review of this lens. People just fell in love with this lens and still love this lens, and I suspect it'll remain in my top 10 forever. Okay, and as you can see, it's a small lens. It's again, it's one of Sony's lighter, more compact lenses. Sony have been chasing ultra wide aperture primes because 5 years ago they were going, where are your ultra wide aperture primes? So Sony have obliged and made them. But weight savings for me traveling are certainly valued, and so I would love to see Sony carry on making some small primes, and certainly Lens of the Year 2018, the 24mm f1.4 primes show that it can be done. You can build wide apertures and light lenses for these mirrorless cameras, and so deservedly it won Lens of the Year. Wide, sharp wide open, sharp stop down, and portable and light. So not on my table. Something has to give. And so it hasn't found its way onto my table. Some people might say, why? Look, in my own line of work, I don't find myself shooting with wide angle lenses at wide apertures. It's just the nature of my particular photography. So that's why I'm more than happy with, say, this 2.8 aperture here. Now, when you get into short telephoto zooms, however, the picture changes for me. I then do love figure ground separation. I do love the bokeh. Often it's hard to achieve with a wide angle lens at a wide aperture, but so easy to achieve with these lenses sitting behind. They're actually both the same focal length. They're 85mm. The 85mm prime is often referred to as the portrait lens. And the portrait genre is one of my favorite genres. I love the tight head and shoulders portrait with the beautiful bokeh in the background of the image. And these are spectacularly good. First cab off the rank was Sony's 85mm GM f1.4. Beautiful lens. It really showed that we don't need to rely on Zeiss to create good glass. Sony's more than up to the job of creating this spectacularly great glass, and people fell in love with it because it was often referred to as the king of bokeh. 13 blades on the aperture, all curved, so it stays completely circular as it's being stopped down. So it doesn't matter whether you shoot wide open or slightly stopped down, you're going to retain that beautiful bokeh. Now, if you do find any sort of negative comments about this lens, a couple of people will have commented on the fact that it can struggle to autofocus in low ambient light, or in a studio when you're working with flash off camera, not Sony flash, I hasten to add, but when you're working with flash off camera using the modeling lights and you stop down to f8, f11, this lens can struggle to find focus. There is a workaround. Okay, this is one of the very few lenses in Sony's lens lineup when shooting in AFS, is it doesn't momentarily open wider to find focus and then stop down to your shooting aperture. It stays stopped down at your shooting aperture. So trying to find focus when you stop down to f11 using the modeling lamps in a studio is a lot to ask of this lens. The workaround, however, does exist. You simply switch off live view setting. So switch that off. The lens will open up to the f2 aperture to find focus. When it's found focus, it will then stop down to your shooting aperture. So top tip there. Certainly not a reason to leave this on the shelf, because if you love that figure ground separation, you love shooting at 1.4, this certainly does deserve a place on my top 10 table. Now, for portability, when this was perhaps just a little bit heavy when I'm trying to travel light, I used to shoot with an 85mm 1.8 Batis, which is certainly a very, very popular lens. And then Sony announced they were also going to make an 85mm prime. It wasn't going to be a G or a GM or a Zeiss, so people didn't really have high expectations of this. Obviously, building it down to a more economical price point, the 85mm 1.8, remember it's got no letters after its name, but when tested, everybody fell in love with this lens because it proved to be just as sharp as the Batis 85mm. And for me, it's actually got a little bit of an edge. Well, apart from the fact that it's probably half the price, it's got a little bit of an edge because Zeiss, when they typically make lenses or design lenses, they leave off the focus hold button on the lens. No focus hold on these two, but there is the focus hold on the 85mm, and the Batis doesn't have that. And I love the focus hold because I reassign that in the menus to IAF. And I love IAF when shooting portraits at ultra wide apertures. Now you could just reassign it to a button on the back of the camera, but I love it on the lens, and all of the other lenses you see in the top 10 have that focus hold button, so I've just got used to that is a position of my IAF button. Okay, so I thought this lens was so good that I voted it on my website as the Sony's Lens of the Year for 2017. So and I don't think anyone else did, but I love the fact that Sony are prepared to make lenses that are spectacularly sharp, that are economical for people who maybe not be able to push the boat out for GM glass, and this is certainly a spectacular lens. Okay, so there are my 4 primes. Some people were going, where's the other prime? I love this prime, but remember, I've got to try and get it into top 10. I don't know why I had to get it into top 10, but obviously makes a good name for the movie, I suppose. On the right here, on my right, your left, I've got 3 zooms. So let's just go through these. On the A7R III, on the right here, I've got perhaps, as I said, the 100-400 was the great companion lens for the A9. The 16-35 2.8 GM lens is a great companion for the A7R III. It's a great landscape lens. Now, I had been using the 16-35 f4 lens, and you know, stop down to f8, f11. It's certainly a spectacular lens, but how much is enough? Just a little bit more. And the 16-35, it didn't add a huge amount of weight or bulk in my camera bag, and so certainly it was something that I was prepared to take on, okay, because of the corner-to-corner sharpness, wide open or stop down, and because of that 2.8 aperture, it does push it into the ballpark of doing some astro work as well, which maybe the f4 didn't really have. Okay, so 1635 GM, I think that was Lens of the Year by DP Review in 2017. I voted the 85 1.8. They went for the 1635 GM. Okay, we've got 2 more lenses behind. Now, I've already got a 1635 for shooting landscapes, but I love the wide angle lens, and so I've got a second wide angle zoom there, and it's the 12-24 f4. Now, you'll notice this one is the only one on the table which I've left the lens hood on, because I don't have the option of taking it off. It is a fixed lens hood, and the reason for that, it's got a bulbous front element, so Sony are protecting that with the fixed lens hood. That does throw in a few issues for people who want to use filters. Okay, so when I actually tested the 12-24, you can find my movies online on my channel, I actually tested that with its companion. I think everybody needs a companion, and so this was the NiSi filter kit to go, designed for the 12-24. So that's got my circular polarizing filter, my graduated neutral density filters, my fixed neutral density filters, and so that gives me full flexibility with working with a 12-24. It's basically the filter holder just sits onto the front of the lens hood, locks into place, and then you've got easy access to rotate the circular polarizer independently of the position of the graduated neutral density filters. Obviously it needs that level of sophistication, and as far as quality of glass goes, this you can't fault. Okay, so that came with that. That's not a lens, but of course that's something that you factor in if you're going to look at the 12-24. Last lens, okay, number 10 is it's my general purpose lens. Everybody needs a general purpose zoom. Now, I had been using the 24-70 f2.8 GM, fabulous lens. Certainly had no complaints, but when the 24-105 came out, I asked Sony if I could test it, and it was a hard decision. It was almost like Sophie's choice on this one. I decided I would switch out my 24-70 GM for the f4 24-105. I like the less weight, you know, with a general purpose zoom, the camera is going to be at your face for a lot of the day. Just having a little bit less weight held up to my face certainly was an advantage. Having that extra reach right out to 105 was also something that I fell in love with. Some people love the extra f-stop, but remember, I've got some primes on the table that give me that extra f2.8, so I was prepared to make that switch out. Some people might want to own both, but I have to be a little bit rational about these things. Okay, so there's my 10. Okay, your favorite lens may not be on the table, and obviously if you're a specialist photographer, for instance, let's see if I can see that lens, is if you're into macro, then I dare say this would be on the table rather than one of these other lenses. This is the 90mm macro. This has been tested as one of the sharpest lenses ever made. I know macro photographers, another macro photographer who's a Sony ambassador in Australia, this is the primary lens of choice that they work with. Fabulous lens, but if I had to choose 10, because this is a specialist lens, I put this on the shelf begrudgingly, so that one didn't make my top 10. Other lenses that I would love to make in my top 10 if I had them here, and I don't have the 400mm f2.8 GM lens. I've been using that to shoot action sports. I shot the Grand Prix, Motorcycle Grand Prix in Australia with that. I love the lens. Sony won't give me one, so I'm saving up for one. That might have found its way onto the table. I'll probably have to clear a bit of extra space for it, but that is a lens that I love as well. If you're into smooth bokeh, you might have voted in the 100 STF lens. That's a specialist, very smooth bokeh lens, but again, it's another specialist lens, and I shoot a broad range of genres, so these are the top 10 I had chosen. Now, some people might say, you know, what would you like Sony to release in 2019 that might replace one of these top 10? Okay, so I had a few ideas about this, and one of my ideas, and it's a focal length that I have loved in the past, and I've tested the Batis 135 2.8 and loved that lens. It's a great focal length to work with. I love the 85, but the 135 is also very useful for shooting that portraiture. Now, this is the 135mm A-mount lens. It was a great lens, and I enjoyed using that with the A-mount cameras. But one of the problems that I have adapting this lens, I'll just take it off its LA-EA4 adapter. Maybe I'd love this lens more if it went through the LA-EA3 adapter, because that would give me faster autofocus and all of the IAF capability that I love. But at the moment it has to go through the LA-EA4 adapter because it's not a focus by wire lens. Any lens that hits the infinity stop and makes that click, you know you've got to go through the LA-EA4. It's basically driven by the camera body, and obviously the mirrorless cameras couldn't do that, so it goes through the LA-EA4 adapter to manage that autofocus capability. Now I am hoping that Sony will release a 135. I really don't mind if it's they decide to save a little bit of weight and go for the 2.8. The 1.8 will give you ultra shallow depth of field, but often 2.8 at the 135 focal length is more than enough to create that beautiful smooth bokeh. And I know Sony will drop in a beautiful aperture with smooth curved aperture blades to give me that beautiful bokeh that I want. Okay, so there is a lens, and I'm looking for it. Where have you gone? Aha, it's up here. And it's not a Sony lens because I'm waiting for Sony to make it. This is an ultra wide angle prime. Now there are occasions when I like to shoot wider than 16mm. 12 is usually wide enough to me, to be honest, but okay, we see a little bit of a size difference there. Okay, I love being able to travel light, and if I can shoot with an ultra wide angle prime that is very small, The 12-24 might stay at home a little bit more often, and I might find myself shooting with a prime. I don't think Sony will go down this route. They might make an ultra wide angle prime, but I fully expect that they'll drop in autofocus, maybe even stabilization. And for me, I don't actually need autofocus on this ultra wide angle prime, and I don't need the steady shot. I have steady shot in camera. So what I'd like Sony to do is build a lens down for size, lack of size and lack of weight. And the real advantage for me of using one of these ultra wide angle primes, this by the way is a Voigtlander 15, but Voigtlander make it 12 as well, and full frame, is here is the filter kit for this ultra wide angle prime. This has just been released and I'm just about to test this filter kit with this prime. Now this Voigtlander, if you go out shopping for this I've actually had to modify this lens to take this filter kit. I had to remove the non-removable lens hood so that could give me access to this beautiful filter system that NiSi have made. Okay, so not everybody will want to do that, so I dare say if NiSi design a filter system for a Sony ultra wide angle prime when it appears, that might be another route that you could take. Okay, so just a comparison. Okay, so companion set and companion set. So you can see why I'm holding out for Sony to make an ultra wide angle prime. Okay, and again it's down to weight, which is one of the advantages of working with mirrorless systems. Okay, so sorry if your lens didn't make the table, but this is a very subjective choice. I wasn't going on ultra sharpest lenses. I was just working off the lenses that are most useful to me when I'm out and about, often traveling interstate and overseas. So if you enjoyed the information, just give me the thumbs up, share it with your friends, head over to www.markgaylor.com. I've got lots of free information, ebooks, I've got Photoshop Actions, Lightroom presets, I've got an active blog, so head over there. I'm not charging for anything on that website, I'm just supporting the alpha community. If you're feeling ultra generous, just make a small donation to help me carry on supporting the alpha community. Okay, thanks.